Well, welcome. In this video, we're going to be looking at how to divide polynomials together. Now, in order for us to do that, we have to be able to reach back into our elementary years and review some terminology and review how to do long division, because that is how we're going to be dividing these, is by using long division. So let's just review some terminology. So here, remember when we have a fraction. Now, yes, I know the numerator for a fraction is the top part and the denominator is the bottom part. But when we're looking at a fraction, we're actually going to do the process of division. We call that numerator, we call that the dividend. That's a part that's going to be divided up. And the divisor is the part that's in the denominator. That's the number that we're going to be dividing into the other number. Now, when you get your answer, yes, I know the answer is a quotient. But remember, sometimes it doesn't always work out nicely where we have a remainder. And the way that we write the remainder is that we add the remainder to the original quotient, but we add it as a fraction. The remainder is written as a fraction with the remainder in the numerator and the divisor, the original divisor, is in the denominator. Now, the process that we do that with long division is above me here. Now, again, you have the dividend, which goes under the little bar, and the divisor goes outside of there. And your answer, it's very important that when we're dividing this, the answer, the quotient, we need to make sure that that lines up with the dividend. And we'll see what I mean by that here in a minute when we review how to do a simple division here with this example that we'll be doing here. But just like I said a second ago, if we have a remainder, that remainder is written as a fraction, as the remainder over the divisor. So let's look now how we would do this particular problem. So if I had 987 divided by 25, the way that I would write that is I'd have the 987 inside the little bar, the dividing bar, and the 25 outside of there. Now let's go through the process of how we would divide these two numbers together.
Okay, so our first step is to see what's the closest number that we could multiply 25 by to get the closest we can to get 98. Because if we use a number that's too small, we're going to get the wrong answer. So we want to make sure that we get the closest to 98 as possible without going over. So for example, I know 4 times 25 is 100, but that's one more than 98. 25 then times 3 is what we would need to use. Now that 3, it's important since we're looking at just this piece to see how many times 25 goes into 98. It's important that that 3 lines up with the 8 there. So 3 times 25 is 75. Now when I subtract those, 75 minus 98, I get 23. The difference between those two is 23. Now the next step is to carry down. We're going to carry down the next number, which would be a 7. So now I want to figure out, well, how many times is 25 going to 237? Well, if I know that 25 times 4 is 100, that means 25 times 8 would be 200. But I could still get closer if I do 25 times 9. That would give me 225. Now we would subtract those. And if I subtract 237 from 225, I would end up getting 12 as my answer. So my answer would be 39 plus 12 25ths, or 39 and 12 25ths would be my answer. Now we're going to apply that same process to this next example, where we have to divide 6x squared plus x minus 2 by 3x plus 2. Now before we do this, this is something that's very important. We need to make sure that our equations are in standard form, which they are, so they need to be in descending order. Now when we check to see if they're in descending order, we want to make sure that all of the exponents are represented. If there's an exponent that's not represented, we have to fill it in with the 0 and then x followed by whatever exponent we're missing. For example, here's what I look for. Here I have an exponent of 2. So in descending order, I should have 2, then 1, and then none. So my last one, my none, is my constant, my variable without an exponent. So for example, looking at this one over here, I have 3, 2, 1, none. So I'm good. Now why is it such an emphasis that I'm making that? Well, in a minute we're going to be looking at an example like this one. 4, 3, none. So I'm missing my 2 and my 1. So those exponents, those pieces, I have to have substituted. I have to have those represented with a 0x squared and a 0x. But we'll get to that in a minute. So let's look at how we would divide this now. So we also need to make sure the same thing with our divisor, the 3x plus 2. We also want to make sure that that's also not missing any pieces. So it's going from 1, an exponent of 1, to no exponents at all. So we're good with both of these parts. So we're going to divide these. So we're going to put the divisor, the 3x plus 2, outside our box. And then we'll have 6x squared plus x minus 2 inside of there. Now here's the way we're going to set these up. For right now, ignore the plus 2. Okay, we want to ignore that completely. We want to focus on the 3x and the 6x squared. So you want to ask yourself, what would we multiply 3x by to get 6x squared? Well, 3 times 2 is 6. X times x would give me x squared. So if I multiply it by 2x, 2x times 3x would give me 6x squared. So since we multiply by 2x, we want to make sure that the 2x, that matches up with a similar degree here in my dividend. So we want to make sure that the 2x is above the x. So now 2x times 3x is 6x squared. But now we take the 2x times 2 and get 4x. Now just like in this example here, we subtracted, after we took and multiplied 25 times 3 and got 75, we found the difference between those, so we subtracted those and got 23. We're going to do the same thing here, but you want to make sure you subtract both of these. So 6x squared minus 6x squared is 0, and 1x, take away 4x, is negative 3x. And just like before in the previous example, the next step would be to bring down the next term, so we're going to bring down a negative 2. And now I want to ask myself, well, what would I multiply 3x by to get negative 3x? Well, that's negative 1. Negative 1 times 3x is negative 3x. Negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. And now again we want to subtract these. Now subtracting a negative becomes a positive. Subtracting a negative here also becomes a positive. So when I add those together I get 0. So this one has no remainder. So we're left with 2x minus 1 is your quotient with no remainder. Let's try this next one together. So again, always check, is it in descending order and is everything included? 3, 2, 1, none. 1, none. Okay, so everything is included as far as we don't have any missing pieces that we have to represent with a 0x followed by whatever exponent we're missing. So let's set this one up now. So we're going to have our divisor on the outside, the 2x plus 4. And inside we have the 8x cubed plus 5x squared minus 8x plus 28. So let's look at what we would multiply 2x by to get 8x cubed. Well, so the way that you want to think of this is what times 2 would give me 8? Well, 2 times 4 would give me 8. Okay. Now what would I multiply x by to get x cubed? Well, x squared times x would give me x cubed. So this is going to be 4x squared. 4x squared times 8x would be, 4x squared times 2x would give me 8x cubed. Now we do the same thing with the 4x squared and multiply that times a 4. 4x squared times 4 is 16x squared. Now remember, the next step is to subtract. This is going to be the one step that people are going to mess up on. And if you mess up on just one of these, it's going to influence the entire answer. So it's very, very important that you understand and practice this process. Otherwise, you will struggle and you will not get this correct on the quiz or on the test. So it is very critical that you practice these problems on your own. So let's do this now. So we subtract these terms. So again, 8x cubed minus 8x cubed is nothing. 5x squared minus 16x squared is negative 11x squared. Bring down the next term, negative 8x. Now there are going to be times like this one where we can't multiply 2 by an integer and get negative 11. We have to multiply by a decimal. And if you're not sure what you multiply by, just divide. On your calculators, negative 11 divided by 2, which would give you negative 5.5. And we would need to multiply x times an x to get x squared. So negative 5.5x times 2x would give me negative 11x squared. Negative 5.5 times 4 would give me negative 22x. So negative 5.5x times 4 is negative 22x. But remember, we can't forget this step. We have to subtract these terms from the other ones. So when I subtract a negative from a negative, that becomes a plus. Negative minus a negative, this also becomes a plus. So now when we combine these, negative 11x squared plus 11x squared is 0. Negative 8x plus 22x is 14x. Now I bring down the 28. And now I've got to figure out, well, what times 2x would give me 14x? Well, that's just 7. So 7 times 2x would be 14x. 7 times 4 would be 28. Subtract those, and you can see that we end up with a remainder of 0 again. So that would be your answer. So again, when looking at this, it looks like a big process, and it is a rather large process sometimes, but the process in and of itself is relatively simple as long as you remember that we always subtract after we multiply to get the next term. And the other thing to remember is to always make sure that everything is represented. And if it's not represented, like I say, we have to represent it with a 0 followed by an x with whatever exponent is missing. So with this one, let's start out with our divisor, x squared plus 2. 2, none. I'm missing my first power. I'm missing x to the first. So I'm going to set this up as being x squared plus 0x plus 2. Now, what's going to go inside this box, my dividend, is going to end up being, again, we have to fill in some missing pieces. We have 4, 3, and none. We're missing our 2 and 1, so we have to represent those with 0x squared and 0x. So we start out with 3x to the 4th minus 7x cubed plus 0x squared plus 0x plus 5. So again, we should be able to count these down. 4, 3, 2, 1, none. 2, 1, none. So I know that everything is represented here, so I'm good to go. Okay, so let's, again, just the same process as we had before. What times 3x, or what times x squared would give us 3x to the 4th? Well, 3 times 1 would give us 3, so I just need to include an x squared. So it'll be 3x squared. So you want to make sure that that 3x squared lines up with the 0x squared. So 3x squared times x squared is 3x to the 4th. 3x squared times 0x would be 0x cubed. 3x squared times 2 would be 6x squared. Remember, we subtract each of these from the previous terms. So 3x to the 4th minus 3x to the 4th is 0. Negative 7x cubed minus 0x cubed would be negative 7x cubed. 0x squared minus 6x squared is negative 6x squared. Bring down the 0x. So now what would I multiply x squared by to get negative 7x cubed? Well, that's going to be negative 7x. Negative 7x times x squared is negative, let me do a different color, negative 7x cubed. Negative 7x times 0, well, that's just going to be 0x squared. Negative 7x times 2 is negative 14x. Again, we want to make sure that we subtract these from the previous terms. So when I subtract a negative, it becomes a positive. When I subtract this negative, it becomes a positive. So now negative 7x cubed plus 7x cubed is 0. Negative 6x cubed, negative 6x squared minus or plus 0x squared, it doesn't matter. It's just going to stay negative 6x squared. And 0x plus 14x would be 14x. Bring down the next term, bring down the 5, so it'll be plus 5. And now we want to ask ourselves, what would we multiply x squared by to get negative 6x squared? Well, that's negative 6. So when I do that, negative 6 times x squared is negative 6x squared. Negative 6x times 0 is 0x. Negative 6 times 2 is negative 12. Subtract these. So minus a negative becomes a plus. Minus a negative, that one becomes a plus. So this is 0. 14x minus 0x is just 14x. 5 plus 12 is 17. So this time, we don't have anything else to bring down, so this is our remainder. So the way that you're going to write your answer would be this. You would say our answer is 3x squared minus 7x minus 6 plus our remainder, which is 14x plus 17, divided by our original divisor. Now, we can include the 0x if you want, or we can just write it as x squared plus 2 would be just fine. So that would be your final answer for this example. Now again, I know the process seems like a lot, but don't get overwhelmed by it. Just take it step by step, and you'll see that it's not as difficult maybe as you would expect. Now, I want you to go ahead and try this next one. I'm going to help you set it up, but I want you to do the work on your own. So with this one, again, you always want to start by making sure that every exponent is represented. 4, 3, 1, 0. Do you notice one that's missing? We're missing a square. So we have to make sure we include that. This one, 1, 0. Or 1 and none. So that one's good to go. So I'm going to start out with r plus 2. Now our dividend, remember we have to include the 0r squared here. So it's going to be 3r to the 4th minus 8r cubed plus 0r squared plus r plus 20. Now I want you guys to try this one on your own. I'm going to give you a hint. You should get a remainder of just 130 as your remainder. So I want you guys to try dividing this and see if you can't get your answer with a remainder of 130. So pause the video and hit play when you're ready to check to see if you have the correct answer. Okay, so again, you should have gotten a remainder of 130 as your answer for your, again, for the remainder, but your complete answer would be 3r cubed minus 14r squared plus 28r minus 55, and the way that you write your remainder would be plus 130 divided by your divisor, r plus 2. If you did not get that answer, you'll want to pause this and check your work with the work that I have here to figure out where you made your mistake. Let's look at this last theorem. This last theorem is called the remainder theorem. And this is meant to help us out, where if we want to figure out what the remainder would be without actually having to completely divide it, if we have a polynomial divided by x minus c. So notice it's not x squared, it's just x minus c. Then the remainder is p of c. Well, what does that mean? To figure out what the remainder would be, what you do is you put the value of c into the equation and solve to find the remainder. So for example, if I had 4x to the 5th minus x cubed plus 1, that's going to be divided by x minus 5. Well, that x minus 5, that's in the form x minus c, where c would be 5. If I put 5 then into that function to get 4 times 5 to the 5th power minus 5 cubed plus 1, I get as my answer 12,376. That means that this polynomial, when I divide them, I get a remainder of 12,376. And that's it. Now, if you had one like this one, x plus 10. X plus 10, even though it doesn't look like it's in that form, x minus c, it is. It's just that c, in this case, is a negative 10. Because x minus negative 10 would be x plus 10, so c is a negative 10. So you just got to be careful when you put this into the polynomial to make sure that you use parentheses. Otherwise, when you do this on your calculator, you're going to get the wrong answer. So it's very important to make sure that you put these negative numbers in parentheses, because otherwise this piece here, your calculator would not give you the correct answer. So when you type that in on your calculator, you end up getting a remainder of negative 2,830 for this one. So it's always helpful if you know that little trick, because even for this previous one, notice how this is in that form, r minus c, where c would have been negative 2. You could have put negative 2 into this function and gotten 130 as your answer, and then you would know that that's the remainder that you should get. So it's always a handy little trick to help you out, because these problems can be, again, they're not difficult, but they can be challenging, because if you make one tiny little mistake at the very beginning or anywhere in the problem, it's going to throw off your entire answer. So make sure that you practice these, because that is the only way to learn to avoid those mistakes, is to get that practice, to get that repetition in. So make sure you work on those problems in your assignment. So with that, good luck.